Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We are here for another one of your questions about work. And this is like, I feel like we're starting at the very thick base of the branch of a tree because there's a lot that we could talk about on this subject. And so, for those of you who are here for the first time, I'm Roy. I'm a startup investor in the future of work. And we tackle your questions and dilemmas about work. You can find past examples here. This is not advice.work. And I was just saying beforehand that I feel like Arnie has been with us before because his presence is so often in my inbox and on my mind, where it's like, I've been trying to describe that to somebody and yet he found a better way to talk about it. So Arnie's expertise is revenue, especially in startup context, but also in lots of other contexts. His newsletter is The Revenue Architect, which I think you can find at eponymous website, therevenuearchitect.com. And Arnie and I met when he was an executive working on ad sales technology, and he's since been COO of a startup, consulting and advising. He's now the chief revenue officer for Athena, which does some training around compliance. And so, Arnie, the question today, which I feel like is, and you can correct me if you think this is wrong, but sort of at the root of the many sub elements of sales that you often talk about is understanding the other. And so the question is, I know that I've heard about this listening thing and that I need to do it. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about why, but how do I actually practice that skill of listening better to the other at work?
Yeah, so I'll think about it as active listening. We're always listening and hearing, but are we actually thinking about how we're going to move that conversation forward? And I think it said on the banner, the first step to persuading the other person is to understand what they care about. And I always thought, you can get anybody to do anything if you know what they care about, or you used to have a shot at it. And obviously that applies in sales because sales is fundamentally about persuasion, but it applies in all roles. It applies in product engineering. You got to listen to your customers, listen to your users. If you're a product manager, listen to your engineers. If you're engineers, listen to your product manager, and so on. It applies in G&A. You want to listen. If you're in HR, you need to listen to your employees. You need to do performance reviews. It's all about listening and listening for feedback. And then, of course, it applies in sales and marketing. The number one gripe that buyers have is that salespeople don't ask enough questions. And paradoxically, salespeople are afraid of asking more and more questions. But at the end of the day, buyers want you to show that you have listened and understood before you jump into a demo or prescribing a solution or telling them how much it costs. And so I think it's very important in sales from in terms of understanding buyers, but also understanding your current customers, because the way your customers describe your product and the outcomes it delivers is the way you should describe your product and the outcomes it delivers to your future customers. So it's all very, very much grounded in listening and listening better.
And so I feel like if you ask people, I mean, I'll fully admit that listening is a skill on which I am working, at home and at work. But if you ask most people about their capacity to listen, my guess is that they're kind of secretly thinking to themselves, oh, no, I really do that. Like, this is something that I do. And I've been on the receiving end of attempts. So this is like a how-to question. I've been on the receiving end of attempts to elicit demand from me by like a seller or somebody like that, where they'll say something like, well, what's your number one problem every day? Or like some cheesy question that feels like it's intended to theatrically demonstrate, and maybe they actually care about the answer. But so like, I guess the question is, what are some effective and this word is so overused, but I'll use it anyway, authentic ways that you can actually prompt a conversation that starts to elicit the kinds of things to which you should listen?
Yeah, it does feel theatrical when especially when you're experienced like you are, Roy, and a salesperson comes in and that they're just trying to lead you down the path, and it's a little bit kind of annoying.
Yeah.
But so I think that the first thing, if you're a salesperson, but also if you're in product or in HR and whatever role you're in, is doing your research on the person to whom you're going to speak. There's so much information on everybody available online. Even if you're inside a company, there's information in Slack. There's so many sources of information that you can use to prepare and bring yourself up to a level of knowledge that demonstrates that you have put in some effort. Because I think if somebody called you, Roy, and tried to say something and demonstrated they'd done some research, you're going to be much more
It
primed
works
to
100% of the time.
exactly.
And what are the techniques? I mean, like, let's say you just have like a normal business meeting, you in your current role, like, help us understand with some examples, what are some of the kinds of prep? Because like, I also always find it a little creepy when they're talking to me about like my children, and it's like, yeah, no, we're not talking about that right now.
Yeah.
Like, you're here to sell me some SaaS.
Yeah.
And so what are some of the techniques that actually work?
Well, let's say it's in a general workplace, so not in sales.
Yeah, just like an internal meeting with somebody else within an
Yeah,
organization.
I mean, you've got to think about what's the objective that you're trying to accomplish from this meeting, and therefore, what is the sphere of relevant information around that objective? So, me trying to sell you on, giving me a raise, got nothing to do with your children.
Right.
I love your children, Roy, but like, it's
No,
nothing,
sure, I get it.
nothing to do here, right? But me, I'm knowing what you care about, what you value. So, me thinking about, well, who does Roy report to, and what does Roy's boss care about, and how can I show what I've done, is aligned with what Roy's boss cares about. Like, that would be a good set of research to understand. So it's not just me. I'm coming at it as, I understand what's important to you, Roy, and let me show you how
Yeah,
I've
there's sort of, I mean, I guess the phrase that comes up for me as you're talking is that there's a relevant research, which is
absolutely.
researching the aspects of what the person's done that are, or believes or cares about, that are germane to the topic at hand. And then, all right, so then let's assume you've like started the person talking. It's a productive beginning of an exchange. What are you really listening for? Because I've definitely heard people do this other theatrical thing, which, by the way, I learned as a management consultant, which always annoyed the crap out of me, which is restate the thing I just said in different words back to me to confirm that they've heard me. And of course, there's a good way of doing it, a bad way of doing it. But what are some of the techniques where you're actively listening that show a healthy kind of engagement?
Yeah. So you want to think less about what you want to say and more about how to build on what the other person is saying. And and you do that in management consulting a bit by just straight up repeating back what they said. But in sales or in any kind of persuasive environment, you are trying to demonstrate that you've listened and then ask a follow-up question. So a very simple technique is to say, "Oh, Roy, you mentioned." A lot of
Yeah,
people in sales, you're talking to somebody who's mid-level, at some point they'll mention their boss. And you want to say, "Oh, you mentioned your boss. Curious, what's important to them in making this decision?" And that they're going to
yeah,
start opening up. Or you mentioned there's a problem transferring data from system A to system B. Oh, curious, can you tell me more about that problem? And there's a limit to, obviously, the one, you don't want it to be all one way and very kind of like an interrogation. So what you need to do is you need to pepper in relevant insights. So for example, oh, you mentioned your boss, curious what's important to them. Oh, they really care about the business outcome. You know what, we have a lot of customers who have that similar problem and care about a similar outcome. So you're
it,
demonstrating that you're listening, and you're demonstrating that you're moving the conversation forward, and you're demonstrating that you're going to be a credible person to deal with because you're bringing some insights. So in a sales context, the number one way to set yourself up for success is to have a very focused ideal customer profile, because the likelihood of running into the same types of people with the same types of problems is very high. In a
meaning you'll
work
have insights you can pepper them with.
Absolutely, yeah,
Yeah,
because insights are a direct result of outcomes that you've delivered for your other customers. So going back to what we said at the top of the conversation, listening to your current customers, how they describe your product, how they describe the outcomes it delivers, that is so important because that gives you those insights that you can use to sell. And if you can use the same framework of sort of, I call that, those insights, a reward. You mentioned relevance, so I've done my research on you, and I'm asking you some questions now to validate that, and then I'm sharing some insights as a reward. Because if I have some relevance, a reward, then I can make a request, which is, Roy, based on what you've heard, is there any reason not to move forward? Or
yeah,
based on what you heard, is there anyone else we should bring in to this discussion? And that
yeah.
that could be in a sales meeting, but it could also be in like we're trying to build a product together. You're an engineer and product manager. I understand what languages you like to write in, or what challenges, technical challenges you faced in the past, and then ask you, should we bring in someone from systems engineering to fix? So it's like it's really kind of I think a universally applicable framework.
Yeah, I love the fact that you're describing a common language across all these different kinds of relationships, and also that there's a difficulty to it of like, one of the reasons why I like your writing on this is I feel like many others try to make a difficult thing sound easy, 3 tips for X, and you're acknowledging that there are principles, underlying principles, and that, it's actually very hard to do the skill of listening and then peppering in some insights as you go. And I've just learned something. I've learned a few things, but one particular thing I've learned in this conversation is something that is we often talk about in a different context, which is negotiation, which is a principle of parallelism. And the principle of parallelism is if you're being asked for something, get something of roughly equivalent value. If they're asking you for information about your startup to consider buying you, well, get a sense of what the process might be for buying you, just as one example. And you're describing in a way kind of the reverse of that, which is if you're asking somebody else for insights as they provide them to you, make sure you're prepared to reward them with something of equivalent value. And I think there's something we're just like wired as human beings for this dance of reciprocity that makes you feel like things are working.
That's
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that's really really important what you just said, that the parallelism, because the reward of insight, it can be both I'm sharing information with you that helps you in your role, but also the fact that I'm listening to you and demonstrating that I've understood you, plus the demonstrating the fact I've researched you, is going to make you feel more inclined to want to talk to me again.
Yeah.
And plus I've shared with you the information. And one thing I found, like when I was younger, I used to just talk a lot because I thought it was really smart. And then as I started to listen more, I realized like just being really technically proficient in something is not enough. You have to
Yeah.
actually dial it back and go, I don't need to tell everyone everything I know.
Well, I love that, and I've definitely struggled with that problem as a congenital interrupter, among other, and a person who likes to talk, and I think by talking too, which makes it worse. Well, now, okay, one last question before we wrap. You've clearly spent a tremendous amount of intention on practicing these skills and sharing them with others. When you think about your own practice of listening and having these kinds of conversations, what are there areas that you are trying to improve at yourself?
Yeah, always. I mean, I think I was nowhere near as good at listening as I am now, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And I found that the shift to remote work's been immensely beneficial to me because I can take a lot of notes, and so I have a visual representation of what I've heard, and I can go back. I just scroll back up my notes and go, Roy, you mentioned parallelism. I can't even say the word, but like, like you mentioned something. Curious, tell me more, or let me build upon that. I also find that it's more acceptable now um, to record meetings, and think of it like an athlete would watch back their game tape.
Oh, I
I,
love that.
I think it's more and more common in sales, but I think it's more and more common in internal meetings. Like you can have chorus running in the background and just record the call, and it's amazing when you listen back and you see what you missed. And oh my word, I missed so many chances to ask a probing question because I was so fixated on myself and what I wanted out. And I didn't think enough about what the other person did. They mentioned their boss. And I know I'm supposed to like connect with the boss because the boss has the money. Why did I, and so listening back and watching, I think is just, I mean, I just know it's immensely, immensely
I
powerful.
love that. I love
Yeah.
that. I feel like as we become busier, we sometimes devote less time to that self-study when ironically it's even more important. For me, the thing I'm working on, and by the way, as you were talking, I was illustrating my example of a way that Zoom has made it easy. Turning on the mute button, which I can't turn on the mute button and talk, has made it a cue for me of like, I'm now in listening mode. Like now I'm
Yeah.
not talking now, and so I find myself toggling it on and off. And I learned a technique from a friend who left Airbnb recently, and he said I'm always looking for ways to correct my inner psychology, which when I get excited about something, I like express excitement by, oh yeah, 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 and talking, and and it can
Yeah.
be off-putting for people, especially in California where everybody's so nice, and I'm a New Yorker, and it doesn't quite work. But the thing that he said to me is occasionally in a conversation, he will stop and say nothing and count to 8 in his head. And it can be a little bit awkward in a one-on-one conversation, but just barely, not quite. And I've just found the few times I've tried, I probably tried it 3 or 4 times in the week or two since he told me that, the effect that silence has on others wanting to contribute something of value into this shared empty space in the middle of the silence has been really profound. And then sometimes I'll just tell them that's what I did, and then even that is like, it's a kindness that I'm like, I'm trying something and they're part of it.
Silence in sales and in negotiation is like a really like foundational skill. I also find it's like asking what else. If you just say what else,
Love
you
that.
never know what's going to come out. Something will come out, and
I
it's
love that.
usually interesting and valuable.
Well, so on that note, I will say one of the hallmarks to me of a successful exchange and conversation is I find myself thinking I want the next one. In fact, our next guest is going to be my co-founder for the company that we started together, Julie Ehrman, who I think you know, who is, and one of the things she said to me is her definition of success is if every week things are going a little bit better than the last one. And it's kind of one of these simple things that like sounds simple, but then really can actually, when you think about it, is profound. And in the same way, conversations like this, I'm like, okay, what else? So please come back. And I want the next conversation a sign of success. And just a reminder for folks, this is not advice.work, not .com. This is one of these new fancy top level domains, is where you will be able to find this and past episodes. Go to the Revenue Architect and sign up. It will, if it does for you what it does for me, is yet another, oh my gosh, how is he writing so fast? I haven't kept up with the last one that I haven't had a chance to read yet, but it is in the stack and very valuable. And I love knowing that it's there as the issues come up. And yeah, Arnie, thank you very much.
My pleasure, Roy. See
To
you
be
soon.
continued. All right.